Our gracious host, Lord Rothschild, Lord Balfour. It's unbelievable to have these two names associated here. Prime Minister May, thank you for that extraordinary speech. You said exactly what Martin Luther King said about anti-Semitism masquerading as anti-Zionism, but you said it so clearly, so powerfully. And your denunciation of anti-Semitism rings so true. Thank you. Thank you on behalf of Israel and the Jewish people. Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson, a worthy successor of Lord Balfour, as we found today. There are so many friends here from Israel, from Britain, from the United States, ambassadors and ministers, former prime ministers, former secretary of state, friends, clergy, rabbis, and archbishops. This is a momentous occasion. It marks a pivotal event in Jewish history, in British history, in world history. The history of modern Zionism is intertwined with the history of Britain, the actions and words of Britain. But for me, this is a deeply moving personal moment. In the beginning of World War I, one of the Zionist leaders, Vladimir Jabotinsky, approached the British government and asked to form a Jewish fighting force within the British Army. And after some consideration, the British government agreed. They gave them the task of being the Zion Mule Corps, which operated first in Gallipoli. It then became the Jewish Brigade, which sowed the seeds of the Israeli Defense Forces. The commander of that force was Lieutenant Colonel John Henry Patterson, a British officer. Patterson had never met Jews. He was skeptical of what he would get. But in Gallipoli and beyond, from Gallipoli to the Galilee, he was amazed. He was amazed by the sacrifice, the courage, the camaraderie of his soldiers, whom he became deeply affectionate for and prized all his life. Some 20 years later, Patterson met my father in the United States during World War II, and he joined him in advocating for a Jewish state. The partnership and the friendship they forged was so deep that my parents decided to call their first newborn, my older brother, Jonathan, in honor of John Henry Patterson. John for him, Nathan for my grandfather. John Henry Patterson was the godfather of my brother, who was later to fall in Entebbe. And I grew up with a silver cup with a dedication to my godson, Jonathan, from your godfather, John Henry Patterson. Think about that. The first Jewish fighting force in 2,000 years. And the commander, the British commander, is the godfather of one of the future commanders in the Israeli Air Force, in the Israeli Defense Force. The commander who helped rescue Palestine from 400 years of Turkish oppression was the godfather of the Israeli commando leader who rescued Jews from terrorists in the heart of Africa. Patterson was to die in the United States. And 2 years ago, fulfilling his last wish, his last will and testament, I brought his remains to Israel and buried him just as he requested, next to his beloved Jewish fighters in Israel. So Britain is intertwined with the birth of Zionism. But for me, this connection is deeply, deeply personal. But that connection has its roots right here in London. In this city, in 1900, Theodor Herzl, our modern Moses, the founder of modern Zionism, addressed the Fourth Zionist Congress that he convened here. He said this: England, free and mighty England, whose vision embraces the seven seas, will understand us and our aspirations. It is here that the Zionist movement, I'm sure, will soar to further and greater heights. Herzl's confidence was well-founded. At the time, British sympathy for Zionism was evident everywhere. You could hear it, you could read it actually, in the novels of Walter Scott and George Eliot. You could hear it in the speeches of Lord Ashley and Benjamin Disraeli, and as we just heard, Lord Shaftesbury in the 1830s. You can see it in the expeditions of the Palestine Exploration Fund, which Queen Victoria established to rediscover and map the land of the Bible. Alongside America, it was here in Britain where Christian Zionism preceded modern Jewish Zionism and kindled its fire. This is why Herzl, in whom that fire burnt brightest, believed that Britain would be the place where his sacred mission to establish a Jewish state would be propelled forward. And just as he predicted, 17 years later, on November 2nd, 1917, with the help of a genius diplomat, Chaim Weizmann, and his friend, Lord Rothschild, and others, Britain recognized the right of the Jewish people to a national home in our historic homeland. And while they were later, I'm a diplomat, I'm the foreign minister, Boris, I'll be careful. And while there were later painful retreats on the path to national rebirth, we always remember proud British Zionists like Lord Balfour, Lloyd George, and Winston Churchill, who entered a pantheon reserved for the greatest friends of the Jewish people in our long history. And we remember those perhaps lesser-known men who played a great role in our national revival and who forged pivotal friendships with their Jewish counterparts. Mark Sykes, recognize the family, Mark Sykes with Aaron Aronson, Colonel Richard Meinertzhagen, Allensby's intelligence officer, who was later falsely accused of being of Jewish descent. Actually, he was of Danish origin. Colonel Richard Meinertzhagen with the Neely espionage network that Aronson founded that provided invaluable intelligence for the British Army in the Palestine campaign. And John Henry Patterson with Jabotinsky. So exactly a century later, here in London, I'm privileged to speak as the Prime Minister of the state that Herzl foresaw and that these men fought to create. Without decades of immigration and hard work, without the courage and sacrifice that was needed to defend our lives and our liberty, the State of Israel would not have come into being. But it was the Balfour Declaration that galvanized international support for Zionism as never before and paved the path for Zionism's entry on the world stage. Now, a once stateless and powerless people has found its rightful place among the nations. Prime Minister May, the Balfour Declaration put Britain on the right side of history. In marking that declaration today, you are keeping Britain on the right side of history. On behalf of the government of Israel and the people of Israel, I thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, while we mark with pride the Balfour Declaration today, Palestinian leaders call it a tragedy. But the real tragedy of the Balfour Declaration is that it took 3 decades to fulfill its promise. Too late for 1/3 of the Jewish people who perished in the Holocaust. Had Israel been established in 1928 or 1938, and not in 1948, millions could have been saved. Some people mistakenly believed that there is an Israel because of the Holocaust. In fact, it's only because there was no Israel that the Holocaust could occur, because there was no sovereign Jewish power to protect the Jewish people or to provide refuge for the 6 million murdered by the Nazis. And the other true tragedy of the Balfour Declaration is that the Palestinians rejected it. They still do. They said so this morning. Incredibly, the Palestinians speak of suing the British government for the Balfour Declaration. Any lawyers in this room? This is a sure win for Britain. It's time for the Palestinians to end their quest to eliminate Israel. It's time it's time for them not just to accept a Jewish national home. It's time for them to accept, finally, a Jewish state, a nation state for the Jewish people, because if they do, the conflict will be over in a minute. But there is good news. Alongside Egypt and Jordan, with whom we've already made peace, others in the Arab world are moving forward. They recognize that Israel is not their enemy, but their indispensable ally in fighting militant Islam. They view Israel as their partner for ensuring a peace and a future and security and prosperity. It's time that the Palestinians will embrace this approach too. And if they do, they will find in Israel and in me an enthusiastic partner for building a peaceful and prosperous future for both our peoples. It's within our reach. I think it's getting closer. Now, you doubt it. You don't really believe what I say, but you don't know everything that I know. And I'm not going to reveal it now. Many others around the world already recognize the benefits of peace and security and prosperity by cooperating with Israel. They seek to benefit from our intelligence prowess in fighting terrorism and our innovative technology in building their economies. People are always amazed at that, but you'd think that it would be obvious that if we liberated our economy, which we did, this is what happens. We untethered the genius and enterprise of our people to become a rising power on the world stage. 3 years after Israel's independence, Winston Churchill wrote Israel's President Chaim Weizmann, one of the architects of the Balfour Declaration. He said this: "The wonderful exertions which Israel is making in these times of difficulty are cheering to an old Zionist like myself." I'm sure that this old Zionist Churchill would have been even prouder today of Israel's incredible successes. It's a shining beacon of freedom democracy, and progress in a troubled region, and we might, with this beacon, help dispel this sea of troubles. Prime Minister May, I thank you again for standing for the historical truth and for your unequivocal denunciation of anti-Semitism. I thank Britain for the foresighted declaration of Lord Balfour. I thank Britain for liberating the Holy Land from 400 years of Ottoman domination. And I thank Britain for valiantly standing alone against the Nazi tyranny. For all this, the Jewish people and the Jewish state will be forever grateful. Thank you.